June
4th, 1989, and I'm interviewing my grandma and grandpa. My dad's grandma and grandpa. My dad's mom and dad.
Got it.
When did your family come to America?
My father was brought to America by his father in 1899, and my mother was born in America.
When did her family come to America?
Her family came to America in 1888.
Were her parents married before, or they got married here?
They were married here.
And they were both born there? Where were they born?
Both of my maternal grandparents were born in Budapest, Hungary, and my father and his family came from a part of Austria-Hungary that later became...
Why did they come to America?
They came to America because they wanted to live a better life, and they thought they would have a better life here than where they came from.
Where did they come from?
I've already told you where they came from.
Where were you born?
I was born in Cleveland, Ohio.
Where?
At, I can't remember the name of the hospital. St. Anne's Hospital.
When were you born?
April 5th, 1918.
How many children were there in your family?
I was an only child.
Who were your parents?
My parents were Helen and Max Haas.
What were they like?
They were kind of nice people. My father was very energetic, a wonderful salesman, and an inventor. My mother was very active in community affairs and in the temple, and she was kind of a nice gal too.
What did your father do for a living?
My father originally was an electrician, and then he started a company called Haas Electric Sales Company in the electrical distributing business, and then he started the company that he called Bud Radio, that is now Bud Industries.
Do you remember your grandparents?
Yes, I do. I remember both of my grandmothers and both of my grandfathers.
Tell us about them.
Tell us about them.
Your grandparents.
My maternal grandmother's name was Clara, and my maternal grandfather's name was Benjamin. And he worked as a blacksmith for the American Steel and Wire Company, and my maternal grandmother kept house. They lived in what was known as the old Newburgh section of Cleveland. My paternal grandfather was a tailor.
Wait, where was the old Newburgh section?
Down at Harvard, in the Harvard area. I don't know exactly what part of...
Is that who Blair was named after?
Blair was named after my maternal grandfather. And my grandmother's name was Clara. My grandfather's name was Herman. And
both grandmothers were Clara?
Did I say Clara? I'm sorry. No, that's not true. My paternal grandmother's name was Goldie.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And
I don't mind the name about Goldie. It's so cute.
I don't remember either of my grandmothers very well because both of them died when I was very young.
Blair is named after Clara.
No,
The
excuse
K
me.
for Keith.
Honey, you recorded. Go ahead.
Did they all live in the United States?
Yes, they did.
Where did you live when you were a little boy?
Well, first We lived on Kinsman Road, East 118th Street. That's where we lived when I was brought home after I was born. Then we moved to Edmonton, no, I'm sorry, then we moved to the 105th Street area on a street called Massey, M-A-S-S-I-E, and from there to Edmonton, which was in the 123rd and St. Clair area, and then we moved to Cleveland Heights to Hillcrest Road, 1642 Hillcrest. And then when I was just finishing junior high school, we moved to Shaker Heights on Kenmore Road.
Give that address. Remember?
3398. I don't know how I remember. Go ahead.
Where did you go to school and what was it like?
The first school I went to was Hazeldale Elementary School, which I went to until I finished the 2nd grade. And then I went to Coventry Elementary School. I went then to Roosevelt Junior High School. And then I went to Shaker Heights High School and graduated from there and went to college at Miami University at Oxford, Ohio.
What was it like going to school way back then?
You're asking the questions. We're not paying any attention to him.
You're not paying attention because that was one of the questions he asked
He
you.
did not.
She said, what was it like?
Yeah.
What was it like?
In the earlier grades, it was kind of fun. But then in the later grades, it got kind of tough. And then in college, it got fun again.
What year did you graduate college?
1940. Should have been 39.
Why wasn't it?
Why wasn't it 39?
They had a rule at college that was a little bit, at my college, which was a little bit queer. You had to go to a certain number of assemblies. The assemblies were on Thursday mornings. And if you didn't go to a certain number each year, they added hours onto your graduation requirements. And suddenly I woke up when I was a senior and found I was 4 hours short of graduating because of that. So I ended up, after I finished there, taking a course in finance for 4 hours credit at what was then Western Reserve University. And so my diploma said 1940 instead of 1939.
What was it like when you were growing up?
When I was growing up, a lot like what it's like when you're growing up. Being a boy, having kind of fun, participating in athletics,
Did you bicycle?
occasionally studying, and stuff
What were your
like that.
favorite sports?
Favorite sports when I was young were baseball and tennis, and then later boxing and golf.
What is your earliest memory you have?
The earliest memory I have, and I don't know how old I was visiting my grandma and grandpa's house, and I remember they lived near a train track, and there was a tremendous lilac bush that looked like a big tree to me in their yard. And I remember playing near the lilac tree and hearing the trains go by. That's the earliest thing I can remember.
And that's all.
Wait, I've got more. Tell us about your parents and their families.
We did.
About your mother and her brothers and your father and his brothers and sisters and things like that.
Well, my father had an older brother and a younger brother and
What
a
were their
sister.
names?
The older brother was Joe, the younger brother was Jack, and the younger sister was Sarah. And my mother
Were they all
had-
born in Cleveland? No. Your father wasn't, so Joe wasn't.
No, Joe, Jack wasn't, and my father wasn't. Joe, I believe, was born in this country, and so was Sarah.
Wait, Jack was older or Joe was older?
Jack was older.
Oh, you said.
You said it the other way around.
We have it on tape.
Can hardly wait till they interview you. I'll loud you up too. And my mother.
Wait, did
had-
they live in Cleveland when they came to the United States?
No, when they came to the United States, they lived in New York. And then times got a little rough, and they moved from New York to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where they worked in the steel mills. My father never got past the 8th grade of regular school. And then after he was grown up, and after he was married, and after I was born, he went to night school and got his high school diploma. And then he went to law school, because at that time, in those years, in the early 20s, you didn't have to go to college before you went to law school. So he went directly into law school. He was very bright in that, and he passed the bar exam a year ahead of his class. My mother graduated from high school from South High School here in Cleveland, and did not go to college, but studied a number of courses after she finished high school.
How old would Grandma be today?
I beg your pardon?
How old would your mother be today?
My mother would be 81 years old.
91.
91, I'm sorry.
And your father?
She was born in 1898. My father was born in 1896. He would be 93. I don't know how old either of my grandmothers were when they died. My grandpa Herman died when we were on our honeymoon, and I would imagine he was about 60. My mother's father died when he was 96 or 97.
That's Bernard?
Benjamin.
Benjamin. It's funny that you should call him Bernard. My grandmother's sister, who for a while my grandfather lived with, always called him Bernard, even though his name was Benjamin. Came from a Hebrew name. What else?
Tell your mother's family.
Well, my mother's family consisted of an older brother, Art, and a younger brother, Harold. In those days, tuberculosis was very common and incurable, and her younger brother, Harold, died when he was in his 40s of TB.
He was single?
No, he was married and had one child, Clara. My, pardon?
Wasn't it Art?
No.
Oh.
Art had no children. He was older, and he, I don't know how old he was when he passed away. He was a big man, always seemed tremendous to me. He was about 6'1" and weighed over 200 pounds. That was practically a giant in those days.
When he died.
Art?
He wasn't old though. He was old.
He was in his late 60s.
When did he die?
My
When you were
mother
young?
had a younger sister who died when she was very, very young. In fact, I think she died before my grandma and grandpa came to the States. She never knew her.
Wait, she couldn't have been a younger sister then.
Older sister.
Oh.
She was, I guess, the oldest. that's all you want to ask. Now why don't we ask Bobby so that
Don't
we
you have
can
anything else you
echo
want to
her.
share with posterity?
The only thing I'd like to share with posterity is the fact that I felt very, very privileged. I've been fortunate that I've had a wonderful family. And lived a very good and full life. My children, all 4 sons and now 3 daughters and 7 grandchildren, really are making sure that the family will continue on. And to me, that's a great thing, especially because it's an accomplishment that I had something to do with originally, but relatively little to do with since then.
Talk about the war. That you went to the war and what you
Which
did.
war? Spanish-American Civil War?
World War
I?
II.
We know you were in all of them, but pick the most recent. Your memory could be freshest.
World War II. I was going to be drafted very early. I had an extremely low draft number, and so I volunteered to go into the Navy. I went in as an enlisted man in the early spring of 1941. Went to Great Lakes Naval Training Station, and there one day, they asked who had graduated from college, and I had graduated from college, so they sent me to a training period of 90 days to become a Navy officer. And I became an ensign in the Navy. I served most of my time in the Pacific on aircraft carriers. Had some shore duty at Vero Beach Naval Air Station in Florida for about 10 months, and then went to carrier duty aboard small carriers in the Atlantic, and then was fortunate enough that I got out in one piece.
Tell about being sunk.
At the end of the war, I was in San Diego as a shore patrol officer on VJ Day.
I had to share those pictures. I showed you.
And about being sunk, well,
What was the name of your ship?
when I went to my first ship, which was in April of 1942, because I'd been in training before that, took a ship out to Hawaii and then got aboard a tanker, which was kind of scary because it was wartime, and we were floating on Lord knows how many gallons of aircraft gasoline down in the Pacific, all the way down to the Coral Sea. I got on board the ship that was called the Lexington, and we went into the Battle of the Coral Sea about a week later, and we were sunk down there. I came back to I was supposed to come back to Pearl Harbor, but they were short what they call a fighter director officer, which was a fellow who worked in the radar section, directing airplanes where to go by radar. And so they moved me over to the Yorktown. Well, the Yorktown had been beat up a little in the Battle of the Coral Sea as well. We went into Pearl Harbor for repairs. We were there for about, I would say about 3 weeks. And then in June we went up to the Battle of Midway, and we were sunk there. And I came back to Pearl Harbor again.
When you were sunk, how were you saved?
Well, there were a bunch of us in the water both times. On the first time, it was at night, and so I floated around a while till the next morning, and then was picked up by a destroyer and then taken to the Yorktown. The second time, it was daytime, and we were picked up again after floating around for about 8 hours by a destroyer and taken to the cruiser Astoria. Well, the next day they found that our ship, which they thought was going to sink immediately, was still floating. It was way over on one side, and so they decided to send a group of us back aboard to see what could be done and get it back in port. They sent word to Pearl Harbor to have an ocean-going tug tow us in. And so we went back aboard. There were about 200 of us went back aboard the carrier. And we finally got under tow to go back to Pearl Harbor. And this time we were hit by a Japanese submarine and then really sunk. And so we were taken aboard a couple of ships and brought into Pearl Harbor. I was in the hospital there for a little while, nothing much. And then sent back to the States for survivor's leave, they called it. Basically, it was every time you get sunk, you ran out of uniforms because they went down with the ship, so we had to get new uniforms. And I was home for 30 days and then was sent back out to Tacoma, Washington, where we were working at Todd Shipyard, putting ships into commission. And then the President Roosevelt, that we were to give some of these ships to the British. So it was kind of funny because the British sent sailors and officers over to pick up the ships and take them back. And they sent them out on the ship for a short training cruise. And all of the British sailors got seasick, but so seasick it was impossible. And we then found out the reason for it was that aboard U.S. Navy ships, all the sailors slept in bunk. And aboard the British ships, they slept in hammocks that would swing back and forth. And so they got seasick in the bunks, and when we tore the bunks out and put hammocks in, they were fine. And then I went down to Astoria, Oregon to work on some other ships, also small carriers. And we sailed those around to the East Coast, and then I spent about 8 or 9 months.
Did you go through the canal to get over to the East Coast?
No, we sailed all the way around Cape of Good Hope and back up again. We were then on what was known as an anti-submarine patrol. We went from Norfolk, Virginia to Recife, Brazil to Casablanca and back in a triangle. And the purpose was to have our planes fly to protect merchant ships going across. Then came back to the States and was assigned to shore duty training Marine night fighter pilots in Japanese fighter tactics. Then back out to the ship, it was called the Bad Richard, another big carrier. Went out and then the war ended and came back, and I was discharged as a lieutenant commander in the Navy. My own personal end of the war was when I got discharged on November the 11th, 1945. What else you want to know?
I thought you were sunk a third time on a Bunker Hill.
No.
No? Just twice?
Sunk a third time in the Atlantic on a Jeep carrier. That was
Why was that nothing?
well, we were hardly in the water at all. We were picked up right away because there were a bunch of merchant ships around, so that was no problem.
So the Germans sank you that time?
Yeah. What else?
Did people get nervous having you come on their ships when you'd been sunk so many?
Yeah, the third time I went aboard ship, they took a look at my record and told me that they would just as soon I didn't come there, but they had nothing to say about it. that was about it. But it was a great experience. I really, the Navy was very clean duty. You had 3 good meals a day and a clean place to sleep and what they called a room steward to take care of making your beds and
Picking up.
cleaning up after you and doing your laundry and all
Is
that
that because you were an
stuff.
officer?
Yeah. And that was kind of good
And you
duty.
had an ice cream machine?
And it sounds terrible to say it, but the war was, for me personally, a good thing. It allowed me to mature. It allowed me to realize one thing that I hadn't realized because I had gone into my dad's business when I came back from when I came out of college. I didn't particularly like it. In the Navy, I found out something very unusual to me, and that was that there were an awful lot of men who had nothing to come back to. And so I considered myself kind of lucky, and then I learned to like the business and have liked it ever since.
How did you meet your wife? As in his grandmother.
Why don't you let her talk about
Well, I
that?
figured we'd get 2 perspectives on this.
No, it'll be the same perspective or I'll hit her. Okay, well, thank you very much for the interview. I appreciate it very much, Josiah.
You're welcome.